If you think Linux is still that niche operating system that only developers and hardcore tech enthusiasts use, you might want to sit down for this, because something just happened that changes the entire conversation. For decades, one sentence has echoed across forums, offices, classrooms, and gaming communities. Yeah, Linux is great, but I still need Windows for that one thing. That one thing could be Adobe software, a specific enterprise application, Microsoft Office compatibility, or more commonly in recent years, gaming with anti-cheat support. No matter how powerful, secure, or customizable Linux became, Windows remained the fallback, the safety net, the just-in-case. But now, Linux has gained a feature that fundamentally shifts that dynamic, and for many users, Windows is no longer required at all. To understand how big this is, we need to rewind for a moment. The dominance of Windows was never just about user preference. It was about compatibility and ecosystem lock-in. Businesses standardized around Windows because that's where their tools ran. Game developers targeted Windows because that's where the players were. Hardware vendors optimized drivers for Windows first. It created a self-reinforcing loop. Linux, powered by the Linux Foundation and maintained by a global community, was technically robust and incredibly flexible, but it lived in a parallel world. Powerful, yes. Mainstream replacement, not quite. That began to change with compatibility layers like Wine, which allowed Windows applications to run on Linux without a full Windows installation. For years, Wine was impressive, but inconsistent. Some apps worked flawlessly, others were buggy. Many didn't launch at all. It was a proof of concept more than a complete solution. Then came Proton, developed by Valve Corporation and integrated directly into Steam. Proton wasn't just a tweak, it was a strategic shift. Suddenly, thousands of Windows games became playable on Linux with a single click. For gamers, this was the first major crack in the wall. But even then, there was a catch. Anti-cheat systems like Easy Anti-Cheat and BattlEye were notorious for blocking Linux users. Competitive multiplayer titles remained locked behind Windows. Businesses still hesitated because enterprise software vendors didn't officially support Linux desktops. The feature that changes everything is the maturation and deep, system-level integration of Windows application compatibility directly into mainstream Linux distributions. Combined with official anti-cheat support and containerized Windows runtime environments that don't require a Windows license, this isn't just Wine works better now. This is a coordinated evolution across the ecosystem. Major distributions have begun integrating compatibility layers so seamlessly that users don't even think about them as separate tools. You download a Windows application, double-click it, and it installs like any native app. Under the hood, translation layers convert system calls in real time. Graphics APIs like DirectX are translated to Vulkan. Input systems are mapped automatically. From the user's perspective, it just works. What makes this moment different from past attempts is scale and official backing. Anti-cheat providers, once resistant, now offer native Linux support or Proton compatibility toggles for developers. Game studios, especially those targeting the Steam Deck, test their games against Linux from day one. The Steam Deck itself, running a Linux-based OS, proved something critical. Consumers don't actually care what kernel their device runs, as long as their games and apps work. That psychological barrier has collapsed. At the same time, advances in containerization and sandboxing have allowed Linux systems to run isolated Windows runtime environments without traditional virtualization overhead. Instead of spinning up a heavy virtual machine that consumes gigabytes of RAM and disk space, these environments share resources intelligently with the host system. The result is near-native performance with minimal configuration. For enterprise users, this means legacy Windows apps can run inside secure containers on Linux desktops. IT departments can standardize on Linux for security and cost reasons, while still supporting critical Windows-only tools. Cost is another quiet revolution happening here. Windows licensing fees, enterprise management tools, and hardware requirements have steadily increased. In contrast, Linux distributions are typically free and open source. Companies deploying thousands of desktops see real savings when they remove Windows licenses from the equation. When compatibility is no longer a blocker, the financial argument becomes hard to ignore. Now, with compatibility barriers fading, those plans are more realistic than ever. Performance is also a surprising factor. Many users testing modern Linux distributions report smoother system responsiveness compared to Windows, especially on older hardware. Linux's modular design allows lightweight desktop environments that consume fewer resources, with Windows pushing features like background telemetry and AI integrations that require constant system resources. Linux often feels leaner and faster when users realize they can run their Windows apps and games while enjoying better performance and privacy. The equation changes dramatically. Security plays a major role in this shift as well. Linux has long been praised for its permission model and transparency. Open source code can be audited. Updates are delivered through centralized repositories. The attack surface is often smaller due to fewer background services running by default. By running Windows applications inside compatibility layers or containers rather than as native Windows processors, Linux adds an extra abstraction layer that can limit the impact of malware. Another key piece of this transformation is hardware vendor support. Graphics drivers from companies like NVIDIA and advanced micro devices have improved significantly on Linux. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and peripheral compatibility are no longer the headache they once were. Laptop manufacturers now ship certain models with Linux pre-installed. When hardware works out of the box and software compatibility is no longer a gamble, mainstream adoption becomes possible. Let's talk about creators for a moment. Video editors, designers, and developers have historically relied on Windows or Mac OS for specific professional software. While some flagship creative suites still don't have native Linux versions, the improved compatibility layers mean many of them run reliably enough for daily work. In parallel, powerful open-source alternatives have matured. The gap between can use Linux and can fully switch to Linux is shrinking rapidly. Perhaps the most significant change, though, is psychological. For years, recommending Linux to a friend came with caveats. You'd say, "It's great, but you might run into issues with this or that." Now, the conversation sounds different. Just try it. Your games will run. Your apps will install. If something needs Windows, it'll probably work anyway. That confidence matters. Technology adoption isn't only about capability. It's about perceived risk. Education is another sector where this shift could have massive impact. Schools and universities often operate on tight budgets. Linux allows institutions to repurpose older hardware, extending device lifespans by years. Students can learn on the same open-source platforms that power servers and cloud infrastructure worldwide. And if they need a Windows-specific application for a course, compatibility layers can handle it. This reduces the need for dual-boot setups or dedicated Windows labs. Cloud computing trends also reinforce this moment. A significant portion of the Internet already runs on Linux servers. Developers deploy applications to Linux-based containers in cloud environments. When their local desktop mirrors that environment, workflows become simpler. The lines between development, deployment, and production blur. Running Windows solely for desktop convenience begins to feel unnecessary. Even AI integration, a space heavily promoted by Windows vendors, is not exclusive. Linux has long been the preferred platform for machine learning, research, and high-performance computing. GPU acceleration frameworks, container orchestration tools, and development libraries often debut on Linux first. As AI becomes more embedded in everyday workflows, Linux users are not left behind. In many cases, they're ahead. So what does this mean for Windows? It doesn't mean Windows disappears overnight. It remains deeply entrenched in corporate ecosystems and consumer markets. But the monopoly of necessity is eroding. Windows used to be required. Now, it's optional. That distinction is enormous. When users have a genuine choice, without sacrificing compatibility, competition increases. And competition drives innovation. We may look back at this period as the tipping point. Not because Linux suddenly became perfect, but because it became sufficient for almost everyone. The combination of seamless Windows app, compatibility, official anti-cheat support, containerized runtime environments, improved drivers, and mainstream hardware adoption forms a convergence. Each piece alone was impressive. Together, they removed the final excuses. Imagine buying a new computer in 2026 and not even thinking about which operating system you need for compatibility reasons. Imagine installing Linux by default because it's free, secure, customizable, and runs everything you care about. Imagine businesses migrating thousands of desktops without worrying about legacy applications. That future is no longer hypothetical. It's unfolding right now. The irony is that Linux didn't win by becoming Windows. It won by staying Linux while building bridges. Instead of demanding that developers abandon Windows APIs overnight, the community created translation layers. Instead of forcing users to relearn everything, distributions refined user interfaces to be familiar and intuitive. Instead of waiting for permission, developers built solutions collaboratively. The feature that changes everything isn't just technical, it's strategic. It represents maturity. It quietly demonstrates that for many people, it already has. Windows is no longer required. And once that realization spreads beyond tech forums into mainstream awareness, the balance of power in personal computing could shift in ways we haven't seen in decades. We are witnessing the slow collapse of an assumption that shaped computing for a generation. The assumption that, to be fully compatible, fully productive, fully connected, you needed Windows somewhere in your life. That assumption is fading. Linux has crossed the threshold. When an operating system becomes not just an alternative, but a complete solution, everything changes.